Hello, and welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews, brought to you by the Sci-Fi-Christian.com. I'm Ben DeBono, here today to talk to you about the fourth book in Peter Straub's Timothy Underhill series, Lost Boy, Lost Girl. Now, just to clarify something, because it is a little confusing with this series. Technically, the first three books here, Coco, Mystery, and The Throat, are considered the Blue Rose trilogy, and then these next two that follow, Lost Boy, Lost Girl, and In the Night Room, are later sequels that are technically outside of that trilogy. But really, I think it's probably better to think about these five books as being one series involving Timothy Underhill, if for no other reason than that the Blue Rose connection between the first three books is really a bit tenuous. It's a present there, but it's not like you have to read one book to read the other. They could be read in any order. I do think the order they're in thematically is the best, but plot-wise, they're kind of all over the place in terms of subject matter and characters and everything. So outside of The Throat, the Blue Rose stuff isn't even that major in an issue in those three books. And to me, the better common thread is, number one, Timothy Underhill as a character, and number two, the thematic sense of unreality that exists in those three books. And we talked about that a lot in the reviews of those three. This sense of how in between books certain details will change. There is intentional contradiction that Straub deals with, both within the individual novels and within the series as a whole. You have a sense of unreality, especially in The Throat, this kind of Gnostic, Platonic sense of storytelling, of how close is a story to, when we tell stories that purport to be true, are they actually true? So as Timothy Underhill is writing these books, in the first three in the series, and then this one, Lost Boy, Lost Girl, and he's claiming that within the world of the story, what he's writing is true. How close does what he's writing actually match up with what really happened within the story world? And does that matter? Does that impact whether or not what he's saying is true? And so it deals with those kind of questions. And all of those things, Timothy Underhill, and that big theme of unreality, of storytelling as a means of accessing truth that is different than just a sort of journalistic sense of truth. All of that carries forward very much into Lost Boy, Lost Girl. So I, at times in the previous videos, referred to the Blue Rose trilogy. From here on out, I will refer to the books as the five-book Timothy Underhill series, but just know that those are kind of interchangeable in how I use them, and if you're reading stuff online, you're likely going to get more references to the Blue Rose trilogy that will not really mention these later two books, even though these are part of the same series for the most part. Lost Boy, Lost Girl is an interesting book because I'm not quite sure what the date is on The Throat. I think it's early 90s, and this came out mid-2000s, something like that. So it's been a long time for Straub revisiting this character, and that's always kind of dangerous, because can you recapture it after so far away? It's interesting because I just started reading Stephen King's novel Dr. Sleep, which is a sequel to The Shining, if you're not familiar with it. So I'm not going to spoil anything about what my opinion is there, but that whole issue of revisiting old characters, whether it's successfully or unsuccessfully, has been on my mind as I've been picking up this book. And certainly, and we'll see when I get to the end of the book if I think King was successful, if that was a good choice, but certainly it's a risky choice. Far more in that case because you're dealing with a classic. But even here, Peter Straub's less well known and whatever. But I think among his fans, Timothy Underhill's a big name. And even just for himself to kind of pick things back up after so long. Another example of this not working out, I think, would be, the infamous Kingdom of the Crystal Skull experience. It's like, well, we revisit a character after 15, 20 years, and the results were disappointing. Pretty much universally recognized as disappointing. In this case, though, I'm pleased to report, I think Peter Straub does a really good job. Timothy Underhill feels like the same person. It doesn't feel like Straub's using the same names, but because so much time has passed, everything's completely different. No, Timothy Underhill still feels like the same character that we have met in the previous 4 books. He deals with the same issues, the same sense of personal demons, the same sense of hostility in his hometown. This book once again takes place almost exclusively in Millhaven. This same sense of him trying to process the horror of life through the medium of storytelling. So in this book, what the basic plot is that Timothy Underhill's sister-in-law has committed suicide, and then shortly thereafter, within a week or so after, her teenage son disappears. And there's a serial killer on the loose in Millhaven, because of course there is. It's Millhaven, and they're trying to figure out, did he get kidnapped by this guy? Is there something else going on? Whatever. What's interesting about this book, because again, like the previous ones in the series, we have a serial killer, we have murder and all that, but it's more, all of these books are more about what's happening after those events and processing, the history behind all of this. And here, things feel a lot closer to home in some ways. We're not going back 20 years to figure out, who is the present day killer and what's his connection to this long ago past or whatever, such as we did in Coco with the Vietnam murders and the modern day serial killer. There's a lot of flashbacks in this novel, but they're very recent flashbacks. So at the beginning of the novel, we have these 2 events that occur, but then most of the novel is actually us finding out what leads up to them, and there's actually pretty little that takes place chronologically after Mark, that's Tim's nephew, his disappearance. And so it's very fascinating that way, the way that Straub plays with our expectations that we're going to go in and solve this murder and we're going to find out what happens next. It's really, no, it's not so much about that. It's not about what happens next, it's about why this happened. And thematically, that's very satisfying, very much in line with the series thus far. So I find this book tremendously successful. I think it fits very well in the series. I think it's thematically compelling. I think it's very moving in the ending, which I'm going to talk about in a minute with a spoiler alert attached, so no spoilers yet, but just hang on. If there is one criticism I could make against it, and I've gone back and forth with this a lot, it's the length. It's a very short book. Now, that's okay, and this is where I'm kind of debating with myself, so I'll give you the debate. On one hand, I like short books. I really do. I like a book that can tell a complete story in 200, even 150 pages, 300 pages, whatever. I think that that's a real skill. I like long books too, but, I think authors who are able to really get to the point like that that's a unique skill and an important one and a valuable one, because it does make your book in some ways more accessible, but in other ways it also lets you really focus in on what you want to say rather than having to get lost in a sea of 1,000 pages. On the other hand, though, the other books in the series are all significantly longer than this one. And because of the fact that it's in this series, it feels truncated. And I've thought about this a lot. Is it a fatal error? No, but does it make it feel like it doesn't quite fit with the rest of the Timothy Underhill books? In that one way, yes. Other than that, it feels great. It's a great thematic plot fit with the rest of the series. But in that sense, no, it doesn't. And I think that there's so much here to explore thematically that it would have been great for him to spend a little more time, 100 more pages, 200 more pages, really fleshing that out. And the fact that he doesn't it make the book feel bad? No. Does it make it feel incomplete? A little. Not in a fatal way, but a little bit. Enough where I do think that that's a negative mark against the book. Fairly minor one, because I really like what's here. And I like that this is a moving read. I like that it's a powerful read. I like that it, even if I'm not a fan of the length, I like that it makes good use of the length to pack a powerful thematic punch for the audience. So I really like what's here. I just wish that it fit a bit more lengthwise and with the rest of the series. Okay. Now, spoiler alert, because I am going to talk about the ending. I find the ending of this book fascinating on a couple of different levels. Number one, this series has kind of always danced around the supernatural. I would call it soft supernatural or psychological horror, as some people might sometimes refer to it. I don't really like the term psychological horror because I think it puts a judgment not a judgment, an interpretive value on what's going on in the story. The second you say psychological horror, to me, that says that interpretively we are saying that the horror or elements present in this book are definitively not supernatural. They are only psychological. And there's some cases where that is the author's intention very clearly for us to get that. So I'm fine in that case. But I think in a series like this, I think it's ambiguous enough where I'm hesitant to just say, yep, psychological horror. So I prefer to say soft horror or soft supernatural, to say that the stuff that really could be, for the most part, the most likely interpretation is that it is psychological, but Straub leaves enough ambiguity in the series where we can interpret certain elements to be more overtly supernatural. And we really get that at the end of this book, where it seems like we have an overt confirmation of ghosts, and an overt confirmation of haunted houses, an overt confirmation of even other realms, and really stuff that you couldn't take any other way except being supernatural, where Mark disappears to be with this girl at the end of the book, who ostensibly doesn't exist, or exists only as a ghost, or exists only in the supernatural realm, and he crosses over into her realm to be with it. Or at least that's what we're told. But here's what I find interesting, is that we know that Timothy Underhill is an unreliable narrator, in the sense of not telling us journalistically what is going on A, B, C, D, E, F, G in the sequence of events. I think that he is a reliable narrator in really driving at what is the truth of a situation, but an unreliable narrator in a documentarian sense. And the spin that we get at the end of this book from Underhill, because of course, oops, we lost our lost boy, lost girl thing there. Well, it's a nice thought, I suppose. Oh, there it's back. Trying to put the book cover up on my background here. I'll have to turn off the option to shut off the screen after 10 minutes or whatever. Or maybe that should be my 1 minute warning that I've talked too long and it's time to wrap up the video. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the spin that we get is that Mark wasn't kidnapped by the serial killer, and he instead has had this supernatural experiences crossed over into another realm. And that's one way to go. The other way to go would be to say that Tim knows that's not true, but he can't handle that truth. And so what he writes instead, even though he knows that Mark has most likely been captured and killed by this serial killer, he invents this other story because the truth is too difficult to handle. And that's, either way, it's a very powerful ending. And I think especially if you go that second way, it fits so well thematically with the series. And it says so much about Timothy Underhill and the way that he processes the world, the way he processes tragedy and truth and everything. I just think Peter Straub hits the end of this novel out of the park. It's really, really good. So I'm going to give this book 4.5 stars. I loved it. I think it's one of the best in the series. I just wish that its complexity and length matched the previous 3 books. If it did that, absolute 5 stars. But as it stands, I'm going to knock it off just a little for that. 4.5 stars. Lost Boy, Lost Girl. If you've come this far in the series, don't stop now. Well worth reading. And even if you look at the other 3 books and they seem intimidating, maybe you do start with the shorter one. You could read this one out of sequence and be okay. And that you'd be fine doing so. So in either case, whether you've read the other 3 or just want to try this one, worth your time, good read, thought-provoking stuff. Peter Straub, one of the best in the business, and continues to knock these books out of the park. So I'm listening to In the Night Room, the 5th and final, at least for now, Timothy Underhill novel. So I will be back in a week or 2 with that review. But for now, I'm Ben DeBono, and this is the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews. Goodbye.